The flashing red and blue lights of Los Angeles patrol cars cut through the quiet darkness of the upscale neighborhood. In the early hours of a warm summer night, police officers pushed past the iron gates of a lavish Beverly Hills estate. Inside, a scene of chaos awaited them. Shattered glass on the marble floor, blood smeared across the walls, and the lifeless body of a woman who, just hours earlier, had been living the kind of life many could only dream of. But beneath the surface of wealth and perfection, there was a secret, a dangerous secret that had now ended in murder. Neighbors would later recall the sound of muffled screams, followed by silence. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The victim was a glamorous wife in her early 40s, married to a wealthy businessman, admired for her beauty and enviable lifestyle. Yet her death was not the result of a burglary gone wrong or a random act of violence. It was something far more shocking. Investigators quickly uncovered the truth. Hidden in the shadows of her luxury and privilege was a forbidden love affair with a man half her age. A 19-year-old immigrant, new to America, desperate to carve out a life for himself, and hopelessly entangled in a relationship that crossed every boundary. What began as a secret thrill soon spiraled into obsession, jealousy, and ultimately, revenge. This is the story of how a wealthy Los Angeles housewife's passion for a younger man shattered her perfect world and ended with her brutal death. It's a story of lust, betrayal, and the destructive power of secrets. And as you'll see, sometimes the people we trust the most, the ones we invite into our homes and our hearts, can become the very ones who destroy us. By all outward appearances, Sophia Miller lived the kind of life that most people only saw in movies. At 42, she was still strikingly beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads at charity galas and country club luncheons. With her flawless skin, elegant dresses, and carefully styled hair, she carried herself with the grace of someone born into wealth, even though her story had begun much more modestly. Her husband, Richard Miller, was a powerful real estate developer, known for building high-rise luxury condos across Los Angeles. His face appeared in business magazines, his name often linked to seven-figure deals and sprawling properties. Together, Richard and Sophia made the perfect couple. He, the successful tycoon, she, the glamorous wife who managed their social calendar with poise. Their Beverly Hills mansion, 8 bedrooms, imported marble floors, infinity pool, was the envy of everyone who visited. Behind closed doors, however, the fairy tale had cracks. Richard's world revolved around business. He spent long hours at the office, frequently traveling overseas, and when he was home, his attention rarely drifted from his phone or the latest project. Sophia, meanwhile, drifted in a world of silence. Their conversations grew shorter, their connection thinner, and though they appeared inseparable in public, in private they were two strangers passing each other in hallways of their oversized home. Sophia had never worked a day in her life after marriage. Richard insisted she didn't need to. Instead, she filled her days with Pilates, spa appointments, designer shopping trips, and charity events where wealthy wives compared diamond rings and designer handbags. She smiled through it all, but inside she felt something gnawing at her, a hollow space no amount of luxury could fill. She had been raised in a middle-class family in Arizona, the daughter of a teacher and a mechanic. In her early 20s, she had dreamed of becoming an artist. She painted landscapes and portraits, hoping to one day exhibit her work. But when she met Richard at a fundraising dinner, her life changed course. Swept into his glamorous orbit, she abandoned her canvas and brushes, choosing instead the security of marriage to a man who promised her the world. For years, Sophia convinced herself she was happy. She told herself the distance in her marriage was normal, that all couples eventually lost their spark. But as she watched other women her age build careers, travel independently, or nurture close-knit families, she began to feel as though her life was on pause. She was wealthy, yes, but she was also profoundly lonely. At night, as she lay in her California king bed, Richard asleep beside her, she often stared at the ceiling, replaying her choices. She wondered if she had traded too much, her art, her independence, her voice, for a life that looked perfect but felt empty. Friends noticed the change. "You're quieter these days, Sophia," one of them remarked over lunch. Sophia brushed it off with a laugh, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was desperate for connection, for someone to see her not as Richard's wife, but as herself. It was in this fragile state that Sophia would soon meet someone who offered exactly what she craved: attention, admiration, and desire. A chance encounter that seemed harmless at first would grow into a passion she hadn't felt in years. But what she didn't realize was that the man who made her feel alive again would also be the one to destroy her. Because behind his boyish charm and hungry ambition, he carried the seeds of obsession. And for Sophia, this forbidden spark of romance would become a fire too dangerous to contain. Across town, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment near downtown Los Angeles, Diego Alvarez was living a life that couldn't have been more different from Sophia's. At just 19, he had arrived in California less than a year ago, leaving behind a struggling family in Mexico. His mother worked long hours as a seamstress. His younger siblings were still in school, and Diego carried the burden of being the one who was supposed to make it. America for him was supposed to be the land of opportunity, but the reality was harsher. Diego didn't speak English fluently, jobs were scarce, and landlords didn't care about dreams, they cared about rent. He took whatever work he could find, cleaning swimming pools, mowing lawns, delivering groceries. 6 days a week, he hustled under the California sun, sweat on his brow, sending what little money he could back home. For Diego, the city was dazzling but distant. He saw the Hollywood hills, the glimmering boutiques, the luxury cars gliding past, but they belonged to another world. He lived on the margins, invisible to the very people whose gardens he trimmed and whose packages he carried. And then came the day his world collided with Sophia's. It was late spring, the air heavy with the scent of blooming jacaranda trees. Diego had been hired by a landscaping company to work on the expansive grounds of the Miller estate. For him, it was just another job: cut the grass, trim the hedges, stay out of sight. Wealthy homeowners rarely noticed the workers who made their properties picture perfect. But Sophia noticed. She stepped out onto the balcony in a flowing silk robe, coffee cup in hand, her eyes drifting over the gardens. Her gaze lingered on Diego, young, strong, the sweat glistening on his forehead under the morning sun. There was an intensity in the way he worked, a quiet determination. For the first time in a long while, Sophia felt a flicker of curiosity. Their first exchange was brief. She offered him water, he thanked her shyly in broken English. But there was a spark, an energy, something unspoken in the way their eyes met. Over the weeks, Sophia found excuses to step outside when Diego was working. She asked questions about where he came from, about his family. He answered nervously at first, but gradually warmed to her kindness. For Diego, this elegant woman seemed like someone out of reach, like the glamorous actresses he had only seen in movies. Yet she was talking to him, smiling at him, treating him as if he mattered. That small acknowledgement was intoxicating. Sophia felt it too. Here was someone who looked at her with admiration, not expectation. Unlike Richard, who barely noticed her presence anymore, Diego seemed fascinated by every word she said. Their conversations grew longer, their smiles softer, until one afternoon she touched his arm as she handed him a glass of lemonade. The electricity of that small contact lingered between them. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew something was shifting. For Sophia, it was an awakening. For Diego, it was the start of a dangerous fantasy. Soon, what began as glances and small talk would become stolen moments. And in those moments, boundaries blurred. Age, wealth, culture, it all dissolved under the weight of desire. But desire, as the story would prove, has consequences. And for Diego, a boy trying to carve out a future in a foreign land, falling for a married woman in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods of Los Angeles, would ignite a chain of events that could only end in tragedy. At first, Sophia tried to convince herself that her fascination with Diego was harmless. He was young, earnest, and polite, hardly the kind of man who could pose any real threat to her life. She told herself she was simply being kind, offering conversation and encouragement to someone who seemed adrift in a foreign country. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Diego's presence carried an energy that contrasted sharply with Richard's cold detachment. He was attentive, curious, and eager to listen. When Sophia spoke about her dreams of being an artist, Diego didn't dismiss her. He encouraged her. When she laughed, he laughed with her, his eyes lighting up as though she were the only person in the world. Their bond deepened with each passing day. Soon, Sophia found herself waiting for his arrival, timing her mornings to coincidentally step into the garden when Diego was there. Their conversations grew bolder, touching on her loneliness, his struggles, and the vast gulf between their lives. It was a gulf they were both aware of, yet neither wanted to acknowledge. One afternoon, as the California sun bathed the garden in golden light, the tension broke. Sophia offered Diego a glass of wine instead of lemonade, and they sat together by the pool. Their laughter came easily, their words flowing like they had known each other for years. When the silence fell, their eyes lingered longer than usual, and Sophia felt her pulse quicken. Before she could think better of it, she leaned in and kissed him. That kiss was the beginning of everything. In the days that followed, their meetings grew riskier. Sophia began inviting Diego inside the mansion when Richard was away on business. At first, it was innocent. Shared meals in the kitchen, conversations in the living room. But soon, their relationship crossed the final boundary. The affair became physical, and with it came an intoxicating mix of passion and danger. For Sophia, Diego's touch was a balm against years of neglect. He made her feel desired again, cherished in ways Richard never did. For Diego, being with Sophia was more than just romance. It was a taste of a life he had only ever imagined. The mansion, the luxury, the intimacy with a woman of her stature. It was all proof that he could belong to this world, even if only in secret. But secrets are heavy, and theirs quickly grew unbearable. Sophia told herself she could manage it, that no one would ever know. She had mastered the art of keeping up appearances. After all, wasn't her entire marriage an act at this point? But with Diego, it was different. He wasn't content to remain in the shadows forever. At 19, his emotions burned hot and reckless. What began as infatuation soon turned into obsession. He wanted more time, more closeness, more of Sophia's world. The brief hours they shared were no longer enough. He started asking questions that made Sophia uneasy. When will you leave Richard? Do you ever think about us together for real? At first, she laughed it off, reminding him of the reality they faced. She was twice his age, married, and living a life that Diego couldn't possibly sustain. But every time she brushed aside his questions, Diego grew more frustrated. Still, she couldn't stop. Despite the risks, Sophia craved him. Every stolen kiss, every whispered word in the dark felt like oxygen. He filled a void she had been suffocating under for years, and yet a part of her knew this couldn't last. But the human heart doesn't always listen to reason. As weeks turned into months, Sophia and Diego wove themselves deeper into the web of secrecy. They developed a routine. Diego would arrive early under the pretense of work, and Sophia would sneak him inside. He learned the layout of the mansion, the hours Richard kept, even the sound of the garage door signaling Richard's return. Each encounter left them both more entangled, more desperate to hold onto the fleeting moments they shared. But the tighter their secret romance became, the closer it moved toward unraveling. Because love, when forbidden, doesn't just stay hidden forever. It festers. It demands more. And in their case, it was about to demand everything. What began as passion soon turned into something darker. At first, Diego was simply thrilled to be near Sophia, thrilled to taste the luxuries of her world and to feel desired by someone so far above his reach. But as the weeks passed, the thrill evolved into need. Diego no longer thought of Sophia as a lover he saw in secret. In his mind, she was his. When he wasn't working on the estate, he found excuses to linger around the neighborhood, hoping to catch glimpses of her car pulling into the driveway. At night, in his small, cluttered apartment, he would lie awake imagining her sleeping in that enormous bed beside her husband. The thought of Richard touching her, of Richard having what Diego believed should belong to him, fueled an anger he couldn't control. Sophia noticed the change. Where once Diego's attention had been flattering, it was now suffocating. He called her constantly, texting late at night with messages like, "I miss you. Why aren't you answering?" Or, "Do you love him more than me?" If she didn't respond right away, his tone shifted to desperation, then to jealousy. "Are you with him?" he asked one evening over the phone. "Diego, please," she sighed, whispering so Richard wouldn't hear from the next room. "You know I can't talk right now." "You're my woman, Sophia," he snapped. "Not his, not anymore." The words rattled her. She had never intended for things to go this far. For her, Diego was an escape, a reckless fling, a secret indulgence in a life that had grown unbearably dull. But for him, it was everything. The imbalance grew sharper. Diego began showing up unannounced. Once he appeared at the back door while Richard was inside the house, forcing Sophia to scramble in panic. Another time, she spotted him waiting near her car in a grocery store parking lot. His presence, once a comfort, now filled her with dread. She tried to reason with him. She reminded him of the risks, of the impossibility of their relationship. But Diego only grew more insistent. "Leave him," he demanded. "We can be together. We don't need his money. I'll take care of you." Sophia laughed bitterly, not at him, but at the absurdity. A teenager barely able to pay his own rent, promising to take care of her? She knew it was fantasy. Yet she also knew better than to crush him completely. His emotions were too volatile, his attachment too fierce. Still, Sophia began pulling away. She stopped answering some of his calls, reduced their meetings, made excuses about being busy with social events. But the distance only inflamed Diego's obsession. One night, after ignoring him for 2 days, she found him waiting outside her mansion gates. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. "Why are you avoiding me?" he demanded. "I'm not avoiding you," she lied, glancing nervously at the security cameras. "It's just, Richard has been home more, we need to be careful." "I don't care about him," Diego shouted. "You're mine, Sophia, you told me you loved me." His voice cracked, somewhere between rage and heartbreak. Sophia felt fear stir inside her chest. She had seen this side of him growing, but now it was undeniable. He wasn't just in love, he was consumed. That night, as she lay beside her husband, her mind raced. She had entered this affair to feel alive, to fill the void in her marriage. Instead, she had awakened something dangerous, something she couldn't control. But Diego wasn't finished. In his mind, Sophia was slipping away, and he couldn't allow it. If she left him, if she chose her husband over him, it would prove what he feared most, that he was disposable, a servant in her world of wealth. And Diego Alvarez was not about to be discarded. What Sophia didn't know was that Diego was already planning, watching, waiting. And soon, his obsession would take a violent turn. Richard Miller was not the kind of man who paid much attention to the small details of his domestic life. His world revolved around contracts, market trends, and investors. But even the busiest man notices when something at home no longer feels quite right. It began subtly. Sophia seemed distracted during dinners, often pushing food around her plate rather than eating. Her phone, once left casually on the counter, was now kept close to her side, face down. When Richard walked into a room, she sometimes jumped, as though caught off guard. At first, he chalked it up to midlife restlessness. He knew Sophia had struggled to find fulfillment beyond their marriage. He offered her money for charities, even suggested she travel more, thinking a distraction would help. But the unease gnawed at him. There was a tension in the house, invisible yet undeniable. One night after a late meeting, Richard pulled into the driveway earlier than expected. As he stepped out of his car, he thought he saw movement in the shadows near the side gate. A figure, tall, lean, slipped into the darkness. Richard's chest tightened. He considered chasing after him but decided against it, assuming it was just a gardener finishing late. Still, something about it unsettled him. The next day, Richard casually asked Sophia if anyone had been working around the house in the evening. She avoided his gaze, brushing off the question with a vague, "Oh, maybe one of the landscapers stayed later than usual." Her tone was too quick, too rehearsed. That was when suspicion began to take root. Richard started paying more attention. He noticed that Sophia suddenly spent long hours in the garden, even when she had no reason to. He noticed the faint smell of cologne on her clothes, not his. He noticed the way her face lit up when her phone buzzed, only for her to quickly hide it. And then came the tipping point. One afternoon, Richard returned home unexpectedly, claiming he had left behind a folder for a meeting. As he walked through the quiet halls of the mansion, he heard laughter drifting from the kitchen. Sophia's laughter, but it was softer, more playful than he had heard in years. When he entered, the kitchen was empty. A half-empty wine glass sat on the counter, along with a plate of fruit. The sliding back door was ajar, and through it, Richard caught sight of someone disappearing down the garden path. It was not a gardener. It was not a deliveryman. It was a young man, barely more than a boy. Richard's stomach dropped. Rage bubbled beneath his controlled exterior, but he said nothing, not then. He simply picked up his folder, kissed Sophia on the cheek, and left for his meeting. But in the silence of his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, he knew. His wife was hiding something. Over the following days, Richard began quietly investigating. He checked the home's security cameras, though Sophia had cleverly learned which angles left blind spots. He called the landscaping company under the pretense of scheduling maintenance and confirmed that one of their workers was indeed a 19-year-old named Diego Alvarez. The pieces began to align. The late-night texts, the laughter, the presence near the gate. Richard didn't confront Sophia immediately. He was a man used to strategy, to gathering evidence before striking. But as he observed her more closely, his anger grew harder to contain. Every glance she stole at her phone, every excuse she made to slip away, fueled a storm inside him. Sophia, meanwhile, sensed the shift. Richard's eyes lingered longer, sharper. His questions came with an edge. The safety of her double life was crumbling, and she felt the walls closing in. Still, she couldn't let go of Diego. Not yet. The affair had become her lifeline, and though she knew the danger was rising, she clung to it desperately. But Richard Miller was not a man to be deceived lightly. And as his suspicion hardened into certainty, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the walls of their gilded home. Richard Miller had built an empire on patience and precision. In the boardroom, he was calm, methodical, never revealing his hand until the moment of strike. But at home, his patience was wearing thin. The evidence was too clear, the deception too obvious. His wife was betraying him. Still, Richard wanted proof, hard proof, not whispered suspicions or fleeting shadows. He needed to see it with his own eyes. One Friday evening, Richard told Sophia he would be working late at the office. Instead, he parked a block away from his mansion and approached on foot, his polished shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The house was dark, except for the warm glow spilling from the back patio. As he crept closer, his chest tightened. Voices floated through the air. Sophia's laugh soft, flirtatious. Then a lower voice, young, accented. "Diego." Richard's jaw clenched. He pressed himself against the stone wall and peered around the corner. What he saw froze him. Sophia sat on the edge of the patio sofa, her silk robe sliding off one shoulder. Diego leaned close, his hand brushing her knee as he whispered something that made her giggle. A half-finished bottle of wine sat on the table between them. Their intimacy was unmistakable. For a moment, Richard couldn't move. He felt as though the air had been punched out of his lungs. His perfect wife, the woman he had given everything to, was wrapped in the arms of a boy who probably couldn't afford the shoes on his feet. The fury hit him like fire in his veins. He stormed forward, his voice like thunder. "What is going on here?" Sophia jumped, nearly spilling her wine. Diego shot to his feet, eyes wide with panic. "Richard," Sophia began, her voice trembling, "this isn't what it looks like." "Don't you dare insult me with that line," Richard roared, his face flushed with rage. "I've seen enough." Diego tried to speak, his voice wavering. Mr. Miller, I... Shut your mouth, Richard barked, stepping closer until Diego backed against the patio wall. The boy's bravado evaporated under the weight of Richard's fury. Sophia rushed forward, placing herself between the two men. Please, Richard, stop. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, Richard spat. While I've been breaking my back to give you the world, you've been sneaking around with him. He jabbed a finger toward Diego, who stood frozen, his chest heaving. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. It's not like that. It's not about the money. I was lonely, Richard. You were never here. Don't you dare blame me for your filth. Richard's voice cracked like a whip. The argument escalated. Sophia pleaded, Diego stammered, and Richard's rage boiled over. He grabbed Diego by the collar, slamming him against the wall. You think you can just walk into my house, touch my wife, drink my wine? Richard snarled, his face inches from Diego's. You don't belong here, you're nothing. Diego struggled, his youthful strength pushing back against Richard's grip. Let me go, he shouted, shoving the older man away. The movement shocked Richard. No one had ever dared put their hands on him. For a split second, the air grew dangerously still. Sophia screamed, "Stop it, both of you," but neither man was listening. Richard lunged again, his fists clenched, but Sophia stepped in, pressing her palms against his chest. Please, Richard, please, don't do this. We can talk. I'll end it, I swear, just don't hurt him. Her words, "don't hurt him," cut deeper than any betrayal. Richard stared at his wife, realizing in that instant that her loyalty was no longer his. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting Diego. That realization broke something inside him. Richard released Diego with a shove that sent the young man stumbling across the patio. He turned to Sophia, his voice low, trembling with fury. You've made your choice. Without another word, Richard stormed back into the house. A moment later, the front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the empty halls. Sophia collapsed into the patio chair, her hands trembling as she buried her face in them. Diego sat beside her, shaken, his chest still pounding from the confrontation. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and deep down, Sophia knew Richard wasn't the kind of man to walk away quietly. The storm was only beginning. The confrontation should have ended everything. Sophia had promised herself she would walk away, that she would cut ties with Diego before Richard's anger boiled into something irreversible. But promises are easier whispered in the quiet of night than lived in the cold light of day. For a brief moment after Richard's outburst, she tried. She ignored Diego's calls, avoided the garden, and forced herself to stay busy with charity events and household duties. But loneliness crept back in like an old ghost. Within a week, she was seeing Diego again, this time in secret motels on the edge of the city, far from Richard's watchful eyes. For Diego, the confrontation had been a turning point as well. He should have walked away, but instead he became obsessed. Richard's insults still echoed in his mind, "You're nothing." The humiliation burned. To him, Sophia wasn't just a lover anymore. She was proof he mattered, proof he could take what belonged to a powerful man, and with every stolen hour his attachment deepened. Richard, meanwhile, grew colder by the day. He didn't explode again. Instead, he turned calculating. He had men tailing Diego, collecting photos and information. He stopped sleeping in the same room as Sophia, but he didn't file for divorce either. Friends noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darkened when her name came up. Sophia lived like a woman caught in a storm, pulled one way by her desire for Diego, the other by her fear of Richard. She told herself she was in control, but deep down she knew she was. The danger was tightening around her. Diego, high on adrenaline and reckless passion, began pressing her harder. "Leave him," he whispered during their secret meetings. "We can run away. You don't need him, you need me." Sophia hesitated. She knew what Richard was capable of. Walking away from him wasn't as simple as packing a bag, it was a death sentence. But Diego couldn't see that. To him, love was enough. To Richard, betrayal was war. And as the triangle twisted tighter, it became clear that only one of them would survive it. Richard Miller had spent weeks pretending he believed his wife's excuses, pretending the house was still a home, pretending he wasn't tracking her every move, but patience, like glass, can only hold so much pressure before it shatters. The breaking point came on a humid Tuesday evening. Richard's private investigator, a man discreet enough to handle the dirtiest of secrets, slid an envelope across Richard's mahogany desk. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. Sophia and Diego entangled in the backseat of a car parked near a dingy roadside motel. Sophia's head on the boy's shoulder, their lips pressed together in a kiss that was anything but innocent. Richard stared at the photos for a long time, his hand trembling only once before his grip tightened. There it was, undeniable proof. No more shadows, no more suspicions. His wife was not only betraying him, she was flaunting it. He placed the photographs back into the envelope, his mind spinning. He had options. He could file for divorce, strip her of every luxury she clung to. He could ruin Diego, have him deported, make sure the boy never set foot in Los Angeles again. But none of that satisfied the rage coursing through him. That night at dinner, Sophia tried to play her usual part, asking about his day, complimenting the chef's roasted lamb, sipping her wine as though the tension in the room didn't exist. Richard studied her with a smile so controlled it was almost terrifying. "How was your afternoon?" he asked smoothly, his eyes never leaving hers. Sophia froze for half a second, just enough for him to notice. "Fine," she said quickly. "I was at the club." "The country club?" Richard pressed. "Yes," she lied. "Tennis with Julia." Richard leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass. "Funny," he murmured, "because Julia called me this afternoon. She said she hasn't seen you in weeks." The color drained from Sophia's face. Her fork clattered onto the plate. In that instant, the last threads of illusion snapped. Sophia realized he knew. Richard, calm and deliberate, had been waiting for her to hang herself with her own lies. Diego's face flashed in her mind. His touch, his promises, his reckless devotion. She opened her mouth, searching for words, but Richard's cold smile silenced her. "You've humiliated me," he said quietly, almost too softly. "And humiliation, Sophia, has consequences." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were a verdict. Sophia's chest tightened with dread. She knew Richard wasn't bluffing, and for the first time she understood the depth of the danger she was in. The affair wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a countdown. And the clock had just hit 0. The mansion was unnervingly quiet that night. No dinner chatter, no clinking glasses, just silence. Sophia moved through the rooms as if walking through a mausoleum, every shadow pressing down on her. She felt it. The storm was here. Richard had barely spoken since the dinner confrontation. His calmness was worse than shouting. It was the quiet of a predator waiting to strike. She tried calling Diego earlier, whispering into the phone, "We need to leave tonight." But he didn't answer. The unanswered call made her panic even more. At 11:30 p.m., Sophia padded barefoot into the bedroom. Richard was already there, sitting in the armchair by the window, a glass of scotch in his hand. The city lights glowed behind him, but his face was cloaked in shadow. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Richard didn't look at her. "I've been thinking," he said, swirling the amber liquid, "about betrayal, about how a person you trust most can cut you the deepest." Sophia's heart pounded. She tried to reason to soften him. "Richard, please, we can work through this. I made a mistake, but—" He finally looked at her, his eyes cold, unblinking. "A mistake?" His voice rose, sharp now. "You humiliated me in my own house, with a boy." He slammed the glass onto the table, shattering it. Shards scattered across the floor like tiny daggers. Sophia flinched, her back hitting the wall. "Richard, stop, please." But he was already moving, years of suppressed rage breaking free. He grabbed her by the arm, dragging her toward the bed. She screamed, thrashing, but his grip was iron. "You think you can shame me, make me a fool," he roared. Sophia fought, her nails clawing at his skin, leaving bloody streaks. For a fleeting moment, she broke free and stumbled toward the door. But Richard caught her by the hair, yanking her back with brutal force. The struggle was primal, her desperate will to survive against his uncontrollable fury. She begged, sobbing, "Please, Richard, I'll end it, I swear, just don't." But reason was gone. The man in front of her wasn't her husband anymore. He was a beast, blinded by betrayal. Minutes later, the fight ended. The room fell silent again, except for Richard's ragged breathing. Sophia lay still on the carpet, her once perfect world reduced to nothing more than broken glass and blood. Richard stood over her, chest heaving, his hands trembling. He hadn't planned this, not exactly. But deep inside, he knew it was always going to end this way. The house was quiet again, too quiet. And for the first time in decades, Richard Miller felt something he hadn't in years. Not love, not grief. But relief. Richard Miller stood frozen, his chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. The only sound was the steady drip of blood seeping into the white carpet. Sophia's body lay twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes open but lifeless. The reality of what he had done began to settle over him like a suffocating fog. For years, Richard had controlled everything: his businesses, his wealth, his reputation, his marriage. But in one brutal, irreversible act, he had destroyed it all. For a brief moment, panic clawed at him. He paced the bedroom, running both hands through his hair, muttering, "Think, think!" He knew the police couldn't find out. A scandal of this magnitude would ruin him, his empire, everything he had built. He poured another scotch, gulping it down as he began to plan. Richard had always been methodical. Even now, in the chaos of murder, his calculating mind searched for order. First, the body. He couldn't leave her here. Too many staff would notice in the morning. He wrapped Sophia in the silk duvet, the same one she had chosen for their anniversary, and dragged her across the floor. The sound of fabric scraping against marble echoed through the silent house. In the garage, he opened the trunk of his black Mercedes. He hesitated, staring at her face one last time. There was no trace of the woman he once adored, only a cold reminder of betrayal. He shut the trunk with finality. Richard drove into the night, every turn of the wheel pulling him deeper into the abyss. The city that had once been his kingdom now felt hostile, filled with prying eyes. On the outskirts of Los Angeles, he pulled into a construction site he owned, a property not yet developed, isolated and unmonitored. There, under the cover of darkness, Richard buried her. His hands blistered from the shovel, his clothes stained with dirt and blood. Each strike into the earth felt like penance, yet also necessity. When the final mound of soil covered Sophia, he stood over it, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temples. By the time he returned home, dawn was breaking. The mansion glowed golden in the morning light, as if nothing had happened. Richard showered, scrubbing furiously until his skin turned raw. He burned the duvet in the outdoor fire pit, watching the smoke rise into the pink sky. Then he rehearsed his story. Sophia had left late last night, angry, upset. She said she needed space. Maybe she went to stay with a friend. He would call her phone, leave messages, act worried. By the time anyone suspected otherwise, the trail would be cold. When the staff arrived, Richard greeted them with forced calm. "Mrs. Miller isn't feeling well," he explained. "She left early this morning." But even as he maintained his mask, a gnawing paranoia began to take root. Every glance from a maid, every passing police siren, every ring of the phone felt like a threat. He had buried the body, yes, but could he bury the truth? Richard poured himself another drink and sat by the window. He stared out at the city he had once ruled with iron control, now realizing a grim truth: the cover-up was only the beginning. Because murders don't stay buried forever. For 2 days, Richard's story held. He told friends and staff that Sophia had stormed out after an argument. He left voicemails on her phone, his voice carefully measured to sound concerned. He even sent flowers to her favorite spa, pretending she might be hiding out there. But by the 3rd day, whispers started. Sophia was a socialite, the kind of woman whose absence was noticed. She never missed her charity luncheons, never ignored her sister's calls, never went this silent. When she didn't show up to host a fundraiser she had been planning for months, alarm bells went off. Her sister, alarmed, reported her missing. That's when the Los Angeles Police Department officially opened an investigation. Detectives arrived at the Miller estate, their shoes clicking against the marble floor as Richard greeted them with polished charm. He offered them coffee, answered their questions smoothly. "When was the last time you saw your wife?" "Late Tuesday evening. We argued, she left. I assumed she went to stay with friends. She's done that before." "Did she take her car?" "No, she called for a driver." "Which service?" Richard paused only a second before replying. "Uber, I think. She often used it." The detectives nodded, jotting notes, but Richard noticed the flicker of doubt in their eyes. They weren't convinced. Over the next week, his carefully built story began to crack. No Uber records. No sightings of Sophia leaving the property. Security cameras from nearby streets showed only Richard's Mercedes leaving the estate that night. Reporters circled the mansion, tabloids splashing headlines. "Where is Sophia Miller?" Friends who once envied the couple's wealth began whispering about Richard's temper, about the rumors of affairs. Detectives returned with a warrant. They searched the house, the cars, even the garden. Richard remained calm, but inside his paranoia screamed. Every creak of the floorboards, every question asked by police felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Then came the break. A construction worker at Richard's undeveloped property stumbled upon disturbed soil. The stench was unmistakable. Within hours, police cordoned off the site. Beneath the earth, they found Sophia's body. The media frenzy exploded. Cameras flashed, helicopters hovered overhead. The story of a wealthy husband, his socialite wife, and the forbidden affair with a younger man was too sensational to ignore. Richard was arrested, his wrists bound in cold steel as neighbors and reporters shouted from beyond the gates. His empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed image, all crumbled in an instant. In the courtroom weeks later, the photographs of Sophia and Diego resurfaced as evidence of motive. The prosecution painted Richard as a man consumed by jealousy, a husband who couldn't bear humiliation. His defense argued temporary insanity, a crime of passion, but the jury saw through it. "Guilty." As the verdict was read, Richard sat stone-faced. The once powerful businessman reduced to nothing more than an inmate awaiting a life sentence. And Diego, he sat in the back of the courtroom, his face pale, haunted. He hadn't killed Sophia, but his presence in her life had lit the fuse. The tragic triangle had claimed its victim, destroyed its players, and left behind nothing but ruins. If you found this story gripping, make sure to subscribe for more true crime narratives where love, betrayal, and obsession collide with deadly consequences.